Derrick Henry, Zay Flowers, and Mark Andrews are all drafted within the first 50 picks of 2024 fantasy football drafts. So today, let's talk about whether or not we want to smash or pass each player at their respective costs. Let's do it right here, right now, in episode 22 of Inside the 20 by Basement Brewed Fantasy Football. Derrick Henry is set to begin a new chapter of his career. After he spent the first 8 years with the Tennessee Titans, he went over to the Baltimore Ravens, signing a 2-year, $16 million contract worth $9 million guaranteed, and he will be spending his age 30 season with the Baltimore Ravens. Now, over on Drafters, which is where I play 100% of my best ball contests these days, and if you've never played on Drafters, I highly recommend it. In fact, you can get a 100% match on your first deposit of up to $100 if you enter promo code BBFF when signing up on Drafters. But over on Drafters, Derrick Henry's ADP is currently RB9 around pick 39 overall, which is an early 4th round pick. And the question for today's episode is whether or not we should smash or pass on that cost. Now, if you've been following along, then you already know how I feel about Derrick Henry. I already gushed all about him. I gushed about his fit with the Baltimore Ravens back in episode 7 of Inside the 20. It's an episode that's quite literally called The Fear of Missing Out on Derrick Henry. Now, we also talked about Josh Jacobs' fit with the Packers. We talked about Saquon Barkley's fit with the Eagles. But that episode, I spent a good deal of time gushing over the matrimony, the match made in heaven that is Derrick Henry signing with the Baltimore Ravens. Now, Henry is leaving a 2023 Titans offense that finished 20th in rushing attempts last season, and he's joining a Baltimore Ravens offense that's finished 12th or higher in rushing attempts in 13 of the 16 years that John Harbaugh has been the team's head coach. Last year, their first year under new offensive coordinator Todd Monken, they finished first in the NFL. They led the entire NFL in rushing attempts. They led the entire NFL in rushing yards, and they finished 4th in the NFL in rushing touchdowns. Plenty of volume to drool over for anybody who's a Derrick Henry manager in 2024. Now, averaging just 1.7 targets per game over his 119-game career, the fantasy football downside and the fantasy football risk to Derrick Henry has always been his lack of usage in the passing game and the risk and the possibility that he could get scripted out of a game if the Tennessee Titans fell behind, if they fell behind early, and if they fell behind often. He could get scripted out of that game as the Tennessee Titans have to abandon the run. For example, and I actually just talked about this yesterday inside of Basement Brewed Fantasy Football's Discord server, which is an online community of fantasy football brains dedicated to helping each other win. You can always join us for less than 1 beer per month using the link that we left for you in the show notes. But last year, the 2023 Tennessee Titans had lost 6 different games by 2 or more scores. Okay? In those games, Derrick Henry averaged just 12.7 touches per game and a sickening 7.2 PPR points per game. It was not pretty. He scored 10 PPR points just once in those 6 games that the Tennessee Titans lost by 2 or more scores. On the other hand, in the remaining 11 games, the 11 games that the Titans either won or lost by less than 1 score, Derrick Henry averaged 21.1 touches and 17.7 PPR points per game. Now we're talking. He scored 15 or more PPR points in 9 of those 11 games, and now you have Derrick Henry, who is going from a 6-11 Tennessee Titans team that got behind on the scoreboard early and often last year, and he's going over to a 13-4 Baltimore Ravens team that's won 62% of their games during the 16 years that John Harbaugh has been the team's head coach. So TLDR, there's much less of a concern of Derrick Henry getting scripted out of football games now being a member of the Baltimore Ravens. Volume in all will not be a concern for Derrick Henry in 2024, and neither will scoring chances. The Baltimore Ravens have finished top 10 in rushing touchdowns in 6 of the last 7 seasons, including top 4 in 4 of the last 6 seasons. In fact, last year alone, Gus Edwards, who was kind of forced into the team's RB1 role, he scored 13 touchdowns in Todd Monken's offense, and then you had Justice Hill, Keaton Mitchell, Melvin Gordon, J.K. Dobbins, and Patrick Ricard, who all added 9 more touchdowns. Okay, so Ravens running backs put up 22 touchdowns last season. Volume won't be a concern. Scoring chances won't be a concern. Derrick Henry's over-under on rushing touchdowns is already set at 10.5. Scoring chances won't be a concern. And by the way, if you're worried about Lamar Jackson vulturing those touchdowns when the Ravens get near the goal line, don't be. I actually just talked about this in a recent blog over on basementbrewedff.com. I left a link for you in the notes if you want to check it out. But Lamar Jackson had just 5 carries inside the 5-yard line last year, resulting in just 1 rushing touchdown inside the 5-yard line. That was fewer than Tyson Bagent, Mitch Trubisky, Gardner Minshew, Jake Browning, and 13 other quarterbacks. Meanwhile, Gus Edwards led the entire NFL in rushing attempts inside the 5-yard line with 23. So imagine what Derrick Henry could do with 23 rushing attempts inside the 5-yard line. And if that wasn't enough, if you want to go a little bit further back, Lamar Jackson had just 4 carries inside the 5 in 2022, 8 inside the 5 in 2021, 3 inside the 5 in 2020. He's averaging just 5 carries for 1.8 touchdowns inside the 5-yard line in his entire career. Lamar Jackson is not going to get the ball when the Ravens get inside the 5. That's going to be King Henry. Volume? Not a concern. Scoring chances? Not a concern. What about efficiency? What about rushing yards? Hard to think that's a concern either. Going from a projected bottom 10 offensive line with the Titans over to a projected top 10 offensive line with the Baltimore Ravens. He has the 5th best odds of leading the entire NFL in rushing yards. He's rushed for over 1,000 yards in 5 of the last 6 campaigns. There's no world in which it seems like Derrick Henry is going to come up short in volume, scoring chances, or yardage. He checks all of the boxes that you could possibly look for in 2024 fantasy football. So the question is Derrick Henry worth his ADP of being fantasy's RB9, around pick 39 overall, aka an early 4th round pick? Are you a software wizard? A code ninja? A Forgemaster? Or maybe even just a mad scientist? Then come build your career ladder with Infinity Labs, an award-winning technology company, best place to work, and business of the year with best-in-class benefits and compensation. Visit i-labs.tech. That's i-labs.tech today, where you can learn more about Infinity Labs, our expanding national presence, and why the status quo has no hold on us. So is Derrick Henry worth an early 4th round pick? Let's put it this way. And again, I just talked about this inside Basement Brewed Fantasy Football's Discord server. I'm telling you, you got to join this online community. It's amazing. It's less than 1 beer per month. The link is in the show notes. But let me put it this way. Derrick Henry currently has the 7th best odds of winning Offensive Player of the Year. Okay, there's only 6 players ahead of him, only 2 of which are running backs, Christian McCaffrey and Bijan Robinson. And yet Derrick Henry is currently being drafted as fantasy's RB9, okay? Christian McCaffrey, Tyreek Hill, Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, Jamar Chase, Bijan Robinson, Derrick Henry, Puka Nacua, Breece Hall, Kyron Williams, Jahmyr Gibbs, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Saquon Barkley make up the top 13 candidates to win Offensive Player of the Year. And Derrick Henry is the only one of those 13 players that is currently not drafted inside the first 2 rounds of 2024 fantasy football drafts. All 12 other guys go within the first 24 picks of fantasy football drafts. Every single one of them. Derrick Henry is drafted at pick 39, early 4th round pick. So basically, imagine getting a 1st or 2nd round pick with your early 4th round pick of fantasy football drafts. Derrick Henry has legitimate top 5 upside in 2024 fantasy football. I am smashing Derrick Henry at his current ADP of RB9, 39 overall, early 4th round pick. Basement Brewed Fantasy Football's 2024 draft guide currently has Derrick Henry ranked 17th overall in the RB6 on the season. Easy smash, probably the biggest smash that Basement Brewed Fantasy Football is behind in 2024. All right, what about Zay Flowers? Entering his age 24 season, entering year 2 in the NFL, entering year 2 in Todd Monken's system. Are we smashing or passing on Zay Flowers at his current cost? Which on drafters, who, again, by the way, will 100% match your first deposit up to $100. It's basically like getting $100 of free money to play with on drafters. But his current cost is wide receiver 25, around pick 33 overall, aka a late third round pick. Are we smashing or passing at that cost? Well, he did have an encouraging rookie season, right? He led the Baltimore Ravens in targets with 108. He led the Ravens in catches with 77, and he led the Ravens in receiving yards with 858. He added 6 touchdowns. He finished as fantasy's wide receiver 31, all as a rookie in 2023. Over 18 games, including the playoffs, he averaged 13.1 PPR points and 6.7 targets per game. Of course, being the team's wide receiver 1 in an offense that threw the ball just 29.1 times per game, which was the third fewest in the NFL, Zay Flowers was a bit boom or bust as a fantasy asset. Now, he did score 15 or more PPR points in 7 of 18 games that the Ravens played, but he also scored fewer than 10 PPR points in 6 of the 18 games that the Ravens played. And that is going to be the concern for Zay Flowers in 2024 fantasy football, is that week-to-week volume, that week-to-week consistency in a run-heavy offense that now just added Derrick Henry. Right? John Harbaugh's offenses have finished 28th or lower in passing attempts in 4 of the last 5 seasons. They finished 30th in the NFL in passing attempts just last year alone. Furthermore, and again, we just talked about this yesterday in Basement Brewed Fantasy Football's Discord server, our online community. We talked about Zay Flowers' outlook being especially concerning when a healthy Mark Andrews is on the field. So in 10 games last year that Mark Andrews either missed or played less than 40 offensive snaps while dealing with an injury, Zay Flowers averaged a sparkling 15.4 PPR points per game. Very good. In the 8 games that Mark Andrews was fully healthy and he played at least 40 offensive snaps, Zay Flowers' 15.4 PPR points per game plummeted to 10.2 PPR points per game. And the best wide receiver finish in Baltimore since Mark Andrews came to town in 2018 was Marquise Brown back in 2021 when he finished as fantasy's wide receiver 22, catching 91 of 145 targets for just over 1,000 yards and 6 touchdowns. Which, by the way, just to double click on that really quickly, Marquise Brown that season finished as fantasy's wide receiver 22 on around 1,000 yards and 6 touchdowns, right? This season, Zay Flowers is being drafted as fantasy's wide receiver 25, and Vegas sportsbooks have his over-under set to around 925 yards and 6.5 touchdowns. So about on pace or less than what Marquise Brown did in 2021 when he finished as fantasy's wide receiver 22. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't want any of this to sound like I don't like Zay Flowers. I definitely do. There's plenty of room for growth for last year's 22nd overall pick in the NFL. We should only see progression from the second year wide receiver. And you'll notice that year that I was just talking about, 2021 with Marquise Brown, he did have 145 targets. Zay Flowers could do some damage with that. Not to mention the fact that Odell Beckham is gone and his 64 targets that he had last year, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it was the second most on the team. Odell Beckham and his 64 targets are gone. There is room for growth for Zay Flowers in year 2 in the NFL. Still, on already the run-heaviest team in all of football that now just added Derrick Henry and now battling a healthy Mark Andrews for targets, it's really hard to get excited about the cost of Zay Flowers when I can instead take Cooper Kupp, Devon Achane, Stephon Diggs, DK Metcalf, Michael Pittman, Sam Laporta, Tank Dell, Kyron Williams, Travis Kelce, Christian Kirk, Derrick Henry, and Amari Cooper. All of those guys are drafted within the same range as Zay Flowers. And don't get me wrong, I will sprinkle Zay Flowers exposure into my best ball portfolio, and I already have, and I will continue to do so. But if I'm forced to choose whether or not I'm going to smash or pass Zay Flowers at his current ADP, that's a pass. I'm out on Zay Flowers in 2024. If his cost stays where it is or continues to climb heading towards week 1, Zay Flowers is currently ranked 39th overall in Basement Brewed Fantasy Football's draft guide. All right, what about Mark Andrews? Let's talk Mark Andrews. Entering his age 29 season, year 7 in the NFL, is he a smash or a pass at his current cost of tight end 4 around pick 50 overall, which is an early 5th round pick? Is he a smash or a pass? Growing up, one of my favorite things to do was play Madden on my PlayStation, PlayStation 2, PlayStation 3, PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5. And when I say play Madden, what I really mean is simulate the games and simulate the seasons, because my favorite part was managing the team, scouting prospects, doing the draft, making trades, signing free agents, and everything that goes into managing a football team and leading a franchise to glory, building it from the ground up. And if that's your type of deal, if you love that sort of thing, you're going to absolutely love GM Dynasty, which is a simulated football game that I recently started playing and instantly fell in love with. With realistic game planning mechanics and immersive features, GM Dynasty puts you in the hot seat of sports management. And it's not just a game, it's a simulation of the real deal. I invite you to get your free team and compete in Basement Brewed Fantasy Football's upcoming tournament, where there's going to be prizes for whoever wins the thing. Register your account on gmdynasty.com, and when you do, join the Basement Brewed Fantasy Football contest using the link that we left for you in the show notes. In 59 career games with Lamar Jackson, where Mark Andrews has played at least 23 offensive snaps, Mark Andrews is averaging a sparkling 14.2 PPR points and 7.2 targets per game. Safe as can be as a tight end, which is very difficult to find in fantasy football, Mark Andrews scores 15 or more PPR points more frequently than he scores fewer than 10 PPR points. He scores 15 or more at 42% of the time, and he scores 10 or fewer 36% of the time. And let's not forget about his week-winning, league-wrecking ceiling, scoring 20 or more PPR points in 15 of 59 games with a career high of 37.7 PPR points back in Week 5 of 2021. Now, prior to last season, which was ruined by a hip drop tackle that knocked Mark Andrews out of the last 7 games of the season, Mark Andrews had finished as fantasy's number 6 tight end or higher in 4 straight seasons, including finishing as fantasy's number 1 tight end back in 2021. And prior to that injury, in the first 10 games that Mark Andrews played last season, he was averaging 13.5 PPR points per game, a rate that would have made him fantasy's number 3 tight end overall had he just made it through the entire season. As far as target competition goes, Zay Flowers, of course, he's a formidable bet for Lamar Jackson targets, but beyond that, there's really not anything. And let's not forget that Mark Andrews played with Zay Flowers last year and averaged 13.5 PPR points per game in the process. So while Zay Flowers is a formidable bet for Lamar Jackson targets, so is Lamar Jackson's longtime number 1 target, Mark Andrews, who's led the Ravens in targets in 3 of the last 5 seasons. There's no need to overthink this one. Mark Andrews is a top 5 tight end with every week tight end 1 upside. Now, we do need to mention that Mark Andrews' current ADP is very, very competitive. There are a lot of formidable options around the spot that Mark Andrews is drafted in 2024 fantasy football drafts. At quarterback, you might have options of Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes around pick 50. At running back, you might be looking at Travis Etienne, Isaiah Pacheco, Josh Jacobs. At wide receiver, you could be looking at Marquise Brown, Keenan Allen, Terry McLaurin. And then even at tight end, besides Mark Andrews, you might be looking at Dalton Kincaid or Trey McBride. It's a very competitive draft spot. Still, I am perfectly fine with Mark Andrews' ADP. I have plenty of exposure of my own. I'm already at 20% exposure in my best ball drafts on Drafters, and Mark Andrews is a smash at his current cost of tight end 4 around pick 50 overall. We currently have him at 41 overall in Basement Brewed Fantasy Football's Fantasy Draft Guide. Basement Brewed Fantasy Football's 2024 Draft Guide is a resource that BBFF subscribers are using to dominate their drafts and get ahead of their league mates before that first football is even kicked in week 1. It contains 300 players, and it's complete with rankings that are going to help with tough decisions, tiers that help you plan for future draft picks, 2024 analysis and previews for all 300 players, stoplights that suggest the perfect time to draft a player, wait for a player, or reach for a player that you absolutely must have on your roster, and an ADP tracker that shows you which direction a player is trending in real drafts over the last several weeks. The draft guide is built and maintained with 30 plus hours of weekly research and over 300 real drafts done by yours truly. It's like you're walking into your fantasy draft having done 300 of your own to prepare. Link that we left for you in the show notes. That's all for today. Let me know in the comments below which player or players you want me to cover in my next Smash or Pass episode. Of course, Basement Brewed Fantasy Football Discord subscribers get priority and get first dibs on who we cover in future episodes. If you want to join Basement Brewed Fantasy Football's Discord server, we left a link for you in the show notes. And again, it costs less than 1 beer per month to join hundreds of other fantasy football brains dedicated to helping each other dominate in 2024. I'll see you on the fantasy football field. Cheers. This brew's for you.